Now, in making my back to basics wine, normally there's a lot of equipment that I've kind of accumulated over the last 2 years that helps make the whole process a whole lot easier, none of which we're going to be using here. We're not going to be using a scale. We're not going to be using a pH meter. We're not going to be using a siphon hose. We are not going to be using a racking cane, and believe me, that one hurts. Not going to be using a bottling wine. We will not be using a hydrometer with testing tube. And since we're not using a hydrometer, we don't need our turkey baster, aka wine thief. We will not be using any pectin enzyme, which on this channel is one of the chemicals that we've started to get away from. We will not be using any sulfites, i.e. Canva tablets. We've long since stopped using that, preferring a more natural approach. Since we will not be mixing our wine in any fashion, we will not need a whisk and we will not need a drill. Even though this is one of the most basic pieces of winemaking equipment that you really ought to have, we will not be using an airlock with bung. And this one really going to hurt. We will not be using a food grade sanitizer, whether Star San, One Step, or any other suitable equivalent. We'll be using something a bit more natural. And that is what I am not going to be using to make this back to basics wine. Now, to make our back to basics wine, we will be using the following. I need 1 gallon of 100% apple juice. We are going to need a second empty sanitized container for what we need to do in about 6 to 8 weeks when we rack it or transfer the contents from one container to the other. That one needs to be ready to go. Now, what do we mean by racking from one container to the next? Well, over the course of time, all that yeast that we put in is going to start multiplying and then doing its thing and producing alcohol, CO2, and eventually dying off, and it's all going to settle down to the bottom. Well, we want to periodically transfer everything above that bottom dead yeast layer into a second container until the wine becomes clear. And I do have a second standalone video on the process of racking in my channel's playlist under winemaking operations. We are going to need 2 cups of granulated sugar. We are going to need the juice of 1/4 of a lemon. We are going to need 1/4 teaspoon of active dry yeast, bread yeast. And it would be nice to have a funnel so that we can incorporate our sugar into our juice. And that is all I'm going to be using to make this wine. Okay, one of the first things we need to do is that we need to make room for this 2 cups of sugar that we're about to put in here in this apple juice carton. So we're going to pour off, I don't know, 3 or 4 cups. Let's do better than that. Let's pour off about just slightly over half. And the reason why we're doing that is that sugar will take up a little bit of volume. It is going to bring this up to the top a little bit closer. And we're going to find out what we need to do after that. Now what we need to do is add in our 2 cups of sugar. Put our cap back on. And let's go ahead and incorporate that sugar. We also have the added benefit of mixing in a little bit more oxygen into our juice that our yeast are going to like later on when we add it into the mix. a little bit more. All right. That having been done, we can take off our cap, put our funnel back in. Let's pour back in some of our juice. Until about yay high. Put a cap back on. And move on to the next step. However, I should point out that you've got a good 2 cups of juice still here. And what I would suggest as a tip is take this juice, put it in a baggie, put the baggie in the freezer, and when you're ready to rack from here into your other container, to make up for the amount of loss of volume, just simply add in what you need of the thawed out apple juice until you can bring your level closer to the top. Now we want to go ahead and add in our lemon juice. Now the lemon juice is acting as an acid blend substitute. Basically, we're providing a little bit more acidity to our wine to be, to help brighten the flavor and also to help prevent bad things from getting in. You don't need to do anything more than just give it a good squeeze. I mean, you don't need to scrape off the edges or anything like that. Just a good solid squeeze. And that's all you need. Let's put a cap back on. Move on to the next step. Now, so far, the only thing that we've done is that we've made sweetened apple juice with a touch of lemon. In order to turn this into wine, we need to add our yeast. And we're only going to be using 1/4 teaspoon. And to the extent possible, kind of spread it around a little bit. Just don't try to just dump it all in one spot. 1/4 teaspoon a gallon has always worked for me, and that's good enough. And although I could just leave it as is, now for those of you who wish to bloom your yeast, you can go ahead and do that as well, but I could just leave it as is because if you can tell, some of the yeast is already beginning to settle to the bottom. Let's give it a slight little swirl to incorporate the rest of it. And quite frankly, you have now begun the process of turning your apple juice, now must, into wine. Now, of course, it's going to take a little bit of time for this to happen. Now, what we want to do now is basically, since we're not using an airlock, and we're not using balloons, and we're not using any other method to keep our mixture from letting CO2 escape, therefore creating a possible bottle bomb, we want to do the following. We're going to loosen our cap and tighten it just slightly. Just a little bit of play so that we can let some air escape. This is not the most preferred method, but if this is all you got, this is all you got to work with. And the purpose of doing that again, of course, is to let CO2 escape and to keep the bugs from getting in. And this method does work. Airlock would be better, but this method does work. Now we're going to try and continue on this video for as long as possible, but again, there are several other steps, and most of these steps you can actually find in my channel's playlist page under winemaking operations, where it covers such topics covering how to sanitize your equipment, how to rack, how to degas, how to back sweeten, how to bottle, I mean, there's a whole host of steps that occur after this. And generally, this whole process generally takes a couple of months. That's right, my friends, a couple of months. Now, when I was first starting out, I was drinking mine after a few weeks, but I've learned better since then. The longer you wait, the better it will be. Now, one other step that we want to do, just so that we can keep track of where things are and what we're doing, is that we want to label our creation. We're making an apple wine, and we started it on this date. That'll let us know that when it's been sitting in the closet for several months, we'll know how many months it's been sitting in the closet before we're ready to crack open the bottle and give it a taste. And this is what fermentation looks like the next day. CO2 is being produced and alcohol is also being produced. Our wine is definitely on its way.